I'm going to pass the stage. He's got a solo review, and it's going to be for the video game Silent Hill 2 retro review for the one that came out all the way back in 2001. Sage, what's your thoughts on Silent Hill 2?
Yeah, well, so this will be interesting to talk about because I feel like this game is, I mean, maybe there's something that this has happened more with, but I honestly feel like it is like the single most like analysis video to death games out there. So I definitely want to try and talk about it in a way that is somewhat different from, because I feel like there are so many videos about this and about breaking down the meaning of all the little elements of it. Um, and so I want to come to this from the perspective of, you know what, this is totally a masterpiece of its time. I think that is pretty much indisputable today. Now, when it first released, it did not have such a glowing reception, actually. A lot of people were disappointed that it didn't pick up the plot threads of the first game and that it felt so different. There's no human villain here to kind of move against. It is much more slow and kind of methodical and really trying to make you think and then feel really strongly. Shadow of the Colossus came out just a couple years later, but this is one of those other games from that time where it's kind of an early example of the hey, video games could be art argument. They're if you really take advantage of the medium and try and tell a something that has a real soul to it. Like you can create some really unique stuff here, just in the format in general. Um, Now, what is interesting to note here is you have a game that has, I think, aged really gracefully in particular ways and kind of really poorly in other ways. Now, I'm not going to comment on the graphics because, it's a game from 2001. I think you only expect so much, right, when it's at that age. And some of this even, I think, looks really good for its time, better than a lot of other stuff that came out the same year. I mean, Max Payne in 2001 had his like perpetual like constipation face still. So like just comparing it to other stuff at the time, this does look pretty strong. Um, and especially these CG cutscenes here that are different from the in-game graphics. Those are like painstakingly like animated by hand, every frame of them. There's no motion capture involved, so it is just like one person just sitting and very slowly detailing these. And so they have this interesting. It's almost like intentionally using the uncanny valley effect to add to kind of the tone and the mystique and the ambiance of all of this, and that's like the greatest thing about the game and how the way it's aged is the atmosphere here is impeccable. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a game, any game, even new stuff coming out now, that has such a kind of like overbearing, oppressive feeling to just exist in it. I mean, it is. I think it is like 20 minutes about before you even see a creature at the beginning of this game. It's this very quiet opening, and like it's just the character looking into a mirror in this dirty like rest stop bathroom, and you can't even see his eyes. He's looking into the mirror, and he comes outside, and he gives this little setup about his wife died 3 years ago from an illness, and then he got a letter from her saying she's in this town of Silent Hill, and despite knowing that she's died, he's come here looking for her, trying to trying to what exactly? That's a big part of the mystery here. And but then to pivot into where I think the game has not aged as well is in terms of the actual game part of it. I have some nostalgia for it, and so I can certainly kind of put some blinders on and play with the controls as they are and engage with it on its own terms. But I think if you're like a brand new player, I don't think this is that fun of a game to play if you do not have some built-in nostalgia for this. You're not stuck completely with the tank controls of the old school Resident Evil kind of Silent Hill style. You do have an option to switch between a little bit more of a smooth modern control scheme. But this game, it's just got a little bit of a weird way of moving around. That's similar to a lot of games at the time. But I just feel like it is not um, the most engrossing thing in the world. And that's one thing, you can mostly just appreciate the ambiance during that. But when you start getting into the combat here, it really becomes, personally, I think a little bit of a mess. It is this very awkward, very clunky. And Silent Hill's always been a little jankier than Resident Evil, right? Like Resident Evil was like the polished, front runner of the genre, right, as far as the technology goes. And Silent Hill was always like a bit of a, low budget God
Jeez.
level. Yeah, like just the way you're swinging the weapons around. It looks goofy. It does. It looks goofy.
He's out of
Um,
breath too. Look at that. He's like, oh,
yeah, well, and hey, that's one thing I'll say that I recognize as a big positive here too is this game. It really makes you feel like this character is just a regular guy. Even like the first two Resident Evil games where you're playing as characters who have never had a crazy experience with monsters before. They're still like, you know, trained special forces, right? Like they know their way around weapons and different types of guns and stuff. I mean, even Leon in Resident Evil 2, yeah, it's his first day on the job, but like he knows how to fire a gun with pinpoint accuracy and has like perfect action movie aim. But here it really does make you feel like just a very normal person. Like this guy, he's not that good at any of this. It takes him a little longer to reload a gun than someone like a Resident Evil character that's got this like firearms expert, precision to it. Uh, and then the other thing about the combat is you. So here's where the game is both I think, easy to revisit and hard to revisit in terms of it does not have a limited inventory space like the old Resident Evil games. So it's never like a worry to have to leave items somewhere or decide what you're going to pick up and leave behind. But the unfortunate flip side of that is that the game, even on a hard difficulty, provides you with so much ammunition and, unbreakable melee weapons that like there's very little challenge to the game. I've played this game over again a number of times, and yeah, like I bump up the difficulty all the way, and I still feel like it is just a cakewalk. And so there's a little bit of the horror I think that can kind of be lost in that, just because like it does a good job of making you feel like a regular person, but then unlike so many other survival horror games, it does lack some of the resource management that I think is part of where some of the tension in that genre really comes from. So, that's a little bit of a downside there. Um, and then, you know, the voice acting is interesting because a lot of people would say it holds up perfectly and it can't be improved upon. Um, And then, some people would say it's like not good, very cheesy, very weirdly delivered.
you want to play
I,
some of it?
I'm,
All right.
yeah, we can play some of it. Just to set it up a little bit. I think I would be somewhere in the middle on this idea. I think that there is an intentional kind of strangeness to the line delivery in the game. And specifically, one of the big inspirations is a lot of stuff like David Lynch filmography. And so I think that there is a kind of off-kilter, like kind of campy awkwardness. And I think some of that's on purpose. But I'm also not going to say that it hasn't aged at all either. I think there is an improvement to be had. But yeah,
So
that's
this
just
is
a
the
little
Silent
kind
Hill
of
HD
aside.
collection right here, and then Silent Hill Down Tour, or
So it's
Downpour.
Silent Hill. So Downpour was the last game that came out back in like I want to say 2012 was the last of the
Okay.
mainline title released, and the HD collection was also released in 2012. Um, Now the HD collection is packaged the second and the third game together there, and with two, it's a little nicer. Um, Two gives you the option to use the original voices from the very original release of the game, and then there is a new set of voice recordings on the HD collection, which personally I think those new ones that they recorded on that set are really not very good. I much prefer the original like 2001 voices. But yeah, go ahead.
Are you taping again? Come on.
Are you taping again? Come on.
I don't know why, but I just love it here.
I don't know why.
It's so peaceful.
I just love it here. It's so peaceful.
Killing a person ain't no big deal.
Killing a person ain't
Crazy
no
guy.
big
Just
deal.
put the gun to their head.
Just put the gun to their head. Pow.
Yeah. So, would you say it's kind of like, what do you think about kind of those clips that we showed right there?
So I think it kind of indicates exactly why I don't like the re-recorded voices from the HD collection, I think very well. For a couple of reasons. One, like I said, I think there is a certain kind of like otherworldly, almost David Lynch element to the original voice recordings. And I think that those re-recorded voices are missing that. And then on top of that, I also think they just don't sound like they're blended into the soundscape of the scene itself very well. That very first couple of lines there by the character Mary, that's an old videotape of her from before she passed away, the main character's wife that he is looking for in the town. And like there is clearly like you can clearly tell her voice sounds like it is coming from a VHS tape playing, right? Like you can very clearly hear it sounds like she's talking on a recording. And the re-recorded voice, it sounds like it is a re-recorded voice that has been overlaid on top of a soundscape. It doesn't feel like it's layered in or accounting for any of the other uh, with the music or sound effects or anything else going on in the scene. Unfortunately, in the HD collection, Silent Hill 3 only had the option for the new voices. So, that's kind of a big drawback of that HD collection as well. But
Does the HD collection now? Did you play when it first came out the copy of Silent Hill 2001, or did you play the HD collection version of Silent Hill?
I played the original.
Okay, and is the HD collection mechanically, is that any better there than the?
So it's actually a little worse, or a lot worse, depending on when you ask. If you go online, on any real like discussion about this release of the game, this HD collection is hated by like the fan bases of these games, and not for invalid reasons, to be honest. When Konami had this HD collection put together, they actually no longer had the original source code or the complete source code files for the games. So I'm trying. The studio that they gave this project to do these HD collections were working off of these completely incomplete versions of the games, and so there's like missing audio sound effects in the HD version. The very famous fog effect, right, that covers the town in Silent Hill when you play the HD version. Some of the shots, like I mean, you're seeing it in the trailer here, even in some of those shots of Silent Hill 3. There's just no fog, like in the like there's just not even in the environment. Um, and that's there in two. I would say of the two games, Silent Hill 2 does not suffer from some of these technical problems. nearly as much. Three and alongside three, also only having the re-recorded voices. Three, I think, suffers a lot more. There's a lot of like frame rate slowdown in three, where I mean the game will slow down to like single digit frames per second. Like it'll get that bad at times. Um, and yeah, and just like from missing sound effects to the voice acting re-recording, just I think just not being nearly as good or integrated into the audio clips as well. I would say if you know if you don't have a PC or and have no way to access copies of the original like PS2, Xbox versions of these games, the HD collection is I think it's better than nothing. Like if there's no other way for you to play these games, I don't think it is. Like a lot of people would say, no, don't touch it. Like you'd be better off not playing them at all if you can't play a different version than this. I'm not going to take it that far. Yes, it has problems, but like if this is your only way to play Silent Hill 2 and 3, I say go for it. It's you know, if you want to have that experience, it is a far more affordable way because copies of the original Silent Hill 2, 3 for like the PS2 or the Xbox, you know, these games go for like $200 plus online. Like they're not easy to get a hold of. They're not cheap. If you have a PC, I will say you could probably get a hold of it a lot more easily there. In fact, for Silent Hill 2, just recently, there's like a fan mod called the Enhanced Edition that you do have to own a copy of the game legitimately to use this mod, but it is a really nice kind of, you know, kind of almost like what the HD collection should have been if they had spent the time and the resources on it to really make it as good as it could be. But yeah, personally, the best experience you could get is the fan mod. Let's see, what's the price on there? Yeah,
Yeah, it's almost
almost
200.
200 there.
Well, actually, they
Yeah,
slashed it.
so
Hey, look at that! They went from 204 to 186. You got a deal, getting a
yeah, there
deal
you
there,
go.
man, getting a steal. Silent
Yeah, I mean,
Hill
I've even
3 renewed is almost 300. I don't know why, but
good God.
there you go.
Yeah, yeah, and then that's just ludicrous. I mean, and that's one of the reasons I'm really glad there's a remake happening is because these are some of those games and they're classic video games, right? Like this is a classic, you know, defining part of video game history that has become again, if you have PC, not so bad, but if you know if you're working off of consoles, you know, almost impossible to access these things. Um, yeah, there's a lot there to love. You know, I've spent a lot of time on criticisms I have of the game and of how things about it that have not aged. And that's again, that's partially because I think that, you know, Silent Hill 2, as far as like content creation goes on YouTube, it's like maybe one of the single most done to death video games and topics that there is on like the entire YouTube platform. And and I've listened to a bunch of those videos myself and watched some of that stuff. And I think 99% of the time it is purely people just gushing about it, how it is this I think it's almost been mythologized to a degree as like it's such a masterpiece that it's untouchable and it's flawless and you can't remake it and you can't, you know, do something, you can't evoke it in any way again. And so I think, you know, it's one of those games I think people have some nostalgia blinders, right? Some serious nostalgia goggles on for. And look, I love this game. It'd be in my top maybe top five of all time. But I do think it's okay to acknowledge that it's aged some and it's got some problems, especially if you're not someone that played it back in the day. If you're trying to get into Silent Hill for the first time now, which I have a few friends that are going to be checking the remake out, I'm like, just play the remake. You don't need to go back and play the original with this new version coming out. It's going to be a much more, I think, at least based on what I've seen, a much more comprehensive experience. Um, yeah.
So this is footage from the Silent Hill 2 remake, which is coming out in a few weeks. In several weeks, it'll be coming out pretty soon in October, perfect for the horror season. There, yeah. So you're saying like you also said this with MGS3. You also said just you might as well just wait for the remake to come out for that.
Yeah,
And then you're pretty much saying the same thing here with Silent Hill 2, the remake. Just wait for you better just to wait for this remake to come out than going
that's
back and
my
trying to.
personal opinion. I think it does depend on the person to some degree. Are you someone that enjoys retro games? Like, do you go back and play a lot of older games? And just some of those kind of archaic sensibilities of game design, just does that stuff just genuinely not bother you? And if that's the case, then okay, sure, then you probably would find a lot of value in going and playing the original before the remake. Um, but I think the average consumer, right, just kind of the regular average consumer, probably wants to engage with something that is that modern, refreshed version of the experience. And I'm not saying everybody, but I think, yeah, I think if you generally play new games and you're not someone who spends a lot of time revisiting old classics or just older video games in general, I think you might as well just wait for the remake, or at least wait to see what the response is. I mean, at the very least, let's see
Combat looks a
what
lot better.
yeah, the combat is far better. I mean, we went from like the fixed camera angles, right? Kind of controlled camera angles to, you got the third person over the shoulder style, right? That Resident Evil 4 kind of invented for this genre, video games in general as a whole here. One of the biggest improvements here, and it's another critique I'll throw out there against the original, boss fights are bad. Every boss fight in the original game is not well designed. That exact footage you just showed of fighting Pyramid Head right there in the original game is like a room like that's got like nothing in it, and yep, that's it right there. And it's like you can like run like 10 feet in either direction, and you just kind of have to run around in circles. Like there's like very little to
Yeah.
this.
Look like you playing tag.
And
Like, oh, don't get me, don't catch
yeah,
me.
exactly. And it's the kind of thing that, like, again, if you have nostalgia, or if you appreciate older games and you're just in the kind of headspace for that thing, this might not be getting your way of enjoying the game. But I think again, if you're just kind of the average person, average modern video game player, this might be hard to really engage with. Like a moment like this might just be a little hard. Now, I will say, I think that the majority of the writing, and the actual storytelling, the atmosphere, the voice acting, for the most part, I think does hold up pretty well from the original. It is one of my favorite
What's going
narratives
on
in a
right
video
here? You
game.
just what's going on right?
Yeah,
It
there
just
you go. That's another boss fight.
oh, jeez. Okay.
That truly, I think, is the worst part of the game. Is that every time they try and throw you into a boss fight, it's just like a tiny room, and there's just like there's no maneuverability. There's not like an interesting like attack pattern to deal with from the enemies. Um, Now, some of the fodder enemies that you deal with in like regular levels actually have more interesting attack patterns than the bosses do. Um, but yeah, it's just that part. That's a part that just isn't working.
Playing
But that's
whack-a-mole with him.
and
Jeez.
pretty much. And that's a part that looks, I think, vastly improved in the remake. Um, but yeah, so like I mean, and then to touch on the thing that I think does make the game a classic and a masterpiece of its time, is the narrative itself. And I'm hesitant to just completely spoil the whole thing and every part of it. With the remake coming so soon, just a couple of weeks, I think you personally, Josh, honestly, would really, I think you could get someone that could really get into the narrative of this. So I don't want to completely just give all of it away, but I will touch on a couple of elements here. First of all, two biggest inspirations for this story: uh, Jacob's Ladder, which, if you're familiar with the original Jacob's Ladder film, I guess I don't know if you've seen that one, but personally, one of my favorite films. You can even see the jacket that the character James in the game is wearing is like straight up the jacket that the character in Jacob's Ladder is wearing throughout that. And there is certain tonal elements that it certainly borrows a little bit from that movie, certain feels to kind of how some of that narrative plays out. But then the other biggest piece of inspiration going into this game, at least as far as I'm aware, this is the big one, is Dostoevsky's Crimes and Punishment. Have you ever read that book yourself?
No, I have not.
That's
Actually,
it's old Russian. What's that?
no, it's just funny you mentioned it as well because that's also a kind of a thing referenced in Beetlejuice too. Funny,
Oh,
but
interesting.
yeah,
Huh. Interesting. I haven't seen that yet, so I'll have to watch out for that reference in the movie. Um, but it it really is like so. Silent Hill 1, right? Is you play as this dude and he's looking for his missing kid, and there is a cult. There's a human villain kind of driving the plot forward that is actively trying to like steal this child from you, and like they're doing rituals and trying to like summon, like a demon, and like the manifestations in the town of the creatures are coming from this like child that this cult is trying to use in like a ritual. And so to go to Silent Hill 2, it's very different on that front because you have a singular protagonist here, and every creature that you're seeing in this game is something that is coming from his mind. There's no human villain here. This is like a person walking through their own personal purgatory, and having their, and the town, it is supernatural. It's not that it's all in his head, but the town is pulling these psychological demons from his mind and manifesting them into reality and giving them concrete corporeal form.
kind of like
And it's
something like It or Alan Wake or something like that. Or
um even maybe more psychological than those, because I think in both it and Alan Wake, there is still like a force, like there is like a intelligence to the antagonist that is like purposely kind of tormenting the main characters in those stories. Whereas here, like this is someone tormenting themselves to a degree. Like I said, I don't want to give everything about this away, but this is someone walking through their own hell, like truly something of their own making and their own consciousness. And you interact with a few other real people through the story, and you see them kind of going on their own journeys and what this town is kind of putting them through. But like the town itself is totally neutral. It's ambivalent towards the people there. It's just that it is the side effect of being in this place is what this is doing to the people. And so it is this very thoughtful. I mean, I've compared it a lot to the style of horror, of something like the original Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where I think it's very poetic, and I think in the remake, I think with the sound design and the modern graphics, I think you could have something that is very viscerally scary again. But at least playing the original, I don't think I don't find it particularly frightening as an experience. But I do think it's very sad and emotionally engaging, and it does also have a lot of catharsis and exploration of grief and guilt, um there's stuff. It's a very dark story. I mean, there's themes of sexual abuse, uh extreme bullying, psychological breakdowns, and all these characters, they're kind of dealing with different demons, and kind of having their own experience of what this place is. Um, and yeah, I mean, I really think that it's one of the strongest video games, especially back when it came out, that you can tell a masterful, like emotionally rich piece of narrative within a video game. And I think it knocks it out of the park at every turn. Um, and just to give you an example of like say these creatures, that you're familiar with, the famous nurse monster from Silent. Everybody knows that one, right?
the nurse monster. I don't actually think I've been. I think I just know my guy Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head. That's what I know.
Pyramid Head is good. That one, I don't know if I want to spoil exactly Pyramid Head's relevance to the narrative, but I will tell you, Pyramid Head came out of the mind of James Sunderland. He
So
is
this
he
is
is
the nurse.
of the mind. Yes. And that's that footage from the movie there.
Yeah, the best
So,
video game movie.
I mean, the first movie is a lot better than the second movie. I'll tell you that much. But so well, here's what's interesting. In the first game, there is a nurse monster, right? It's a little different visually though, because it is a kind of a child's fear of hospitals that's manifesting into these nurse monsters. And so, you know, they don't look like sexy nurses. Like they're this design that I think people are familiar with from the movies is from the second game where they've got these very short skirts, low cut blouse, right, with a lot of cleavage showing, kind of high heels on their feet. And I can, that's one I don't think that totally spoils the story of the game, but this man's wife was dying of a disease, and you know, he spent years completely unable to be intimate with his wife, right? To kind of living in some degree of sexual repression of his own mind, probably fantasizing about the nurses in the hospital where his wife was staying. And that manifests in the form of these creatures as guilt, right, for looking at these other women like that, well as wife. So that just shows you like every creature. I think there's only 9 creatures in the whole game, including Pyramid Head himself. But all of them have like a very deep psychological purpose within the narrative itself. It's never only game design. And so, like in the movie, I criticized that because that Silent Hill movie is more so based on the plot of the first game, where it's a little girl bringing these creatures to life. And in the movie, and I'm like, is this 8-year-old girl afraid of super busty nurses? I'm not sure that totally tracks in that adaptation, but yeah.
Mm, okay. I mean, yeah, definitely some freaky looking nurses there for sure, with the
And,
faces.
and they did a great job visually adapting them. It's just that their placement within the story is kind of incoherent because they have such a deep seated reason for being there in the game's story.
Mm. Um, and you mentioned, yeah, a lot of stuff kind of going on here. And with Silent Hill, you kind of mentioned it wasn't that well received at first when it came out.
No.
So it says right here, so it says in North America, Japan, and Europe, over 1 million copies of Silent Hill were sold, with the greatest number of sales in North America. Some critics praised its psychological horror story, use of symbolism and taboo topics, atmosphere, graphics, monster design, soundtrack, sound design, and emotional depth. It's considered to be one of the best video games of all time. The game was followed by Silent Hill 3 in 2003, a remake developed by Bluebird Team, which is gonna be coming out, like I mentioned, October 8th there. And this Silent Hill 2 game is actually, coming up on its anniversary, there. It's September 25th, which is gonna be coming up in a few weeks, so maybe we can drop this video on its directly on its anniversary there.
Perfect.
So we can do that, and as you mentioned, it did derive from its influence from things like Jacob's Ladder, and also the work of David Lynch, Adrian Lyne there as well, and the paintings by Francis Bacon, Andrew, White as
Yes.
well. Also some of the paintings
Big
by
inspiration for some of the kind of the visualizations of the creatures, and they all have a little bit of a rotten flesh aesthetic to them, and that goes back to the first game as well. That was an element of the aesthetic of the franchise. This kind of like both the creatures and the environments themselves feel dead in this very interesting way.
wow. So, what would be your rating for Silent Hill 2 original?
Now, I will say I have the nostalgia to go and appreciate this, for everything that it was when it came out, for the ways that it still holds up, and I think there are many ways in which it does. And so, if I were to do this review on launch of, back in 2001, I would probably say this is cinema. I think that the story is that thoughtful and well conceived, and iconic. Especially all this time later. There's a sequence. It's kind of one of the last parts of the game, but Monica Morgan or Monica Horgan, who plays the voice of the late wife. So that you see in some flashbacks, like the VHS tape that you saw there. There's this really great scene that she gets to read where, and she couldn't read it without crying. And so like in the game, they're like you can hear very real raw emotion going into this. And it's the kind of thing you talk about from like when you talk about like the best movies of all time and how soulful that they feel and how engaging they are. And I think this captures all of that. Now reviewing it today and kind of, like I said, I think I'm more willing to acknowledge the faults that this game has developed from aging than some people maybe are, because I think this game gets mythologized about how perfect it is on the internet. But you know, even with that said, I think those elements that don't hold up can only drag it down so much to where I would still give this like a low peak for those elements, because I think the parts of it that do hold up just that well.
Okay. And is this the best Silent Hill game?
In my opinion, it is. Yeah, I think it's the best one. I think I've still yet to completely play through the very first game totally for myself, but I played through two and three many, many times. I like three a lot. It starts to maybe drop off a little bit with four, and everything that came after four is just like legitimately not very good. It's one of those franchises that they just didn't really know what to do with after a while. But yeah, I would say so. I think Silent Hill 2 is kind of the iconic entry in the franchise. It is narratively, I think, a masterpiece. And even though there's elements that have aged, I think I think getting a remake, and I think that's why this is one of those games that deserves a remake more than almost anything else, because I think it is of such high quality, and that a remake that fixes those other elements of it and yet keeps that part that does work intact. I think that very easily has the potential to be just as much of a masterpiece next month as this was when it originally released.
Yeah. And you've already pre-ordered Silent Hill 2.
I'll be turning it on at 11 p.m. October 5th, like the second the digital file goes live.
uh, yeah, so it's going to
I'll
be
be
coming
sitting there
out.
staring at the timer for like 10 minutes before it comes out, too.
Yeah, you're going to be playing it. Hopefully, you're going to be giving a review of the remake after you're done
Absolutely.
finishing it. How long is
It's
this
going to
game
take
supposed?
me. So the original is, I would say, 8 to 12 hours on a first playthrough. Probably more like 6 hours on a replay once you know how to do everything. So it sounds like they've added some stuff. The core narrative here, they've definitely given across the idea that they've kept the narrative intact. The things that are all great and there about the original, all of that's kept. But they've added stuff. They've fleshed this out. In the original, you kind of have, I'd say, four like major locations that are interior buildings, levels that you go through. There's not much in the way of exploring to do in the town outside of those really like specific areas. But here, just in some of the footage that I'd say like the first maybe hour or so of the game has kind of been shown off. There's a ton of interiors, a ton of like music stores. There's like an abandoned but like botanical garden like on the way into the town at the beginning of the game now, like a sawmill. Like so, they've added all these kind of optional places that you can go and explore. There's new puzzles. That's one thing I didn't mention so much. The game's also got a lot of originalized a lot of puzzles in it that are actually pretty well designed, and this remake is adding to that. It's adding even more puzzles. And it's worth noting that there are two. Anybody paying attention to the remake already knows this, but Masahiro Ito, who was the original monster designer for the original couple of Silent Hill games. He is working on this remake alongside the new developer. He's helped develop the new combat engine. So you have him from the original staff, and then you also have Akira Yamaoka, who was the composer for the soundtrack for pretty much, I think good and bad, like every Silent Hill game. I want to say he worked on, and he is, I think he's just a masterful musician, and he was able to do some incredible work. Sound design, it's something I didn't really mention, um, as something that holds up extremely well from the original, and working on. I think he made 9 hours of music for the remake. Whether that's like kind of remixed tracks or completely new pieces of music. So I think that's going to be like impeccable, most likely. Um, and all in all, I'd say there's probably, from what I've read, an additional like 5 to 6 hours of like kind of new, original, and additional content that was not present in the original game. So you're probably looking at like 16 to 20 hours, maybe, if you really take your time trying to explore everything, get like check out all the multiple endings and stuff, look for all the hidden items and whatnot. So like for a survival horror game, I feel like most Resident Evils come out, they're like 8 to 12 hours long is typically like the longest version of those. And so like this is almost more on par with the length of something like The Last of Us, in terms of exploration and just the kind of amount of things you can kind of spend your time doing.
So a low peak from you for Silent Hill 2. Very good review. Thank you a lot, sir.